Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a fascinating transitional moment for Vincent van Gogh.
We are. We're looking at his move from Nuenen to Antwerp. That was late 1885.
Right. And a listener sent us some fantastic source material, his letters from that time, plus some analysis. So our aim here is to unpack this, understand his reasons for moving, what he found in Antwerp, and how his art started changing.
It's a really pivotal few months, actually. Nuenen wasn't working for him anymore.
An artistic cage, I think you called it before we started.
Yeah, something like that. It had become really limiting.
Okay, so what were those limits? The sources mention issues with the local church figures.
Definitely. There was real antagonism, apparently, from the sexton and the priest. And the big problem that caused was finding models.
Oh, wow.
Especially for nude studies, which, he felt were absolutely vital for him to develop as an artist. It wasn't just personal friction. It was directly hindering his work.
So a real practical block, not just feeling uninspired.
Exactly. That rural Brabant environment, it just wasn't conducive to the kind of, artistic exploration he needed.
That makes sense. So he needed out. And Antwerp was the beacon, the escape route.
It really was. He saw it as this place full of artistic potential. He was incredibly keen to see the works of Rubens, other Baroque masters, too.
They felt that need before, right, to connect with art history.
Yes, his trip to Amsterdam had really cemented that for him. Antwerp felt like the next logical step, a place to learn directly from these giants he admired.
So late November 1885, he actually makes the move. What was it like when he arrived? Where did he stay?
He got there near the end of the month.
Yeah.
And he found lodgings, quite aptly, above a paint merchant's shop.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at 194 Rue des Images, the Street of Images. You couldn't make it up, really, for an artist looking for inspiration.
The Street of Images. That's perfect. Okay, so one thing the sources highlight early on is this growing interest in Japanese prints. Was that immediate?
It's interesting. It seems to have been subtle at first. I mean, the huge impact, that really comes later in Paris and Arles.
Right.
But we know he had, quote, a lot of small Japanese prints pinned up on his walls there in Antwerp.
So he brought them with him or bought them there?
Probably bought them there, or maybe some came from Theo.
Yeah.
And it's quite likely the de Goncourt brothers writing about Japaneserie, that whole craze for Japanese art.
Mm-hmm.
That probably fueled his interest. He described it as fanciful, peculiar, unheard of. So even if his paintings in Antwerp don't scream Japanese influence yet, it was definitely like starting to color his view of things.
Like planting a seed.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's in Antwerp, he's seeing Rubens, Rembrandt, Halls. Did that shift his focus? The sources mention portraiture becoming more central.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Seeing those powerful portraits face to face, it seems to have really solidified his desire to paint people.
He felt painted portraits had something special.
He really did. He talked about them having a life of their own, something connected to the painter's soul. He was quite dismissive of photography in comparison, felt a machine just couldn't capture that human essence.
A strong belief in the power of paint. But the old story with Van Gogh, money was tight, wasn't it?
Oh, incredibly tight. That acute lack of cash, as the letters put it, it actually forced him to consider doing something he probably hated the idea of.
Which was?
Painting portraits from photographs, just to try and earn something. You can feel the compromise there, given how strongly he felt about painting from life.
Yeah, that tension between ideals and reality. Did he paint the city itself much? I know there are paintings of the Steen, the cathedral.
He did some, yes. Views of the Steen fortress, studies of the cathedral. But it's very telling, isn't it, that he said he'd sooner paint people's eyes than cathedrals. Even the grandest building didn't hold the same interest for him as a person's face, a man's soul, as he put it. He found more depth there, even in, ordinary or marginalized people.
That really sums up his focus, doesn't it? And was he able to find people to paint?
He started looking. He found this sympathetic Antwerp barmaid, and interestingly, he compared what he wanted to achieve with her to a Rembrandt painting, The Head of a Whore.
Aiming for that same kind of raw honesty.
Exactly, like his Brabant peasant portraits, but maybe with a different urban edge. He also scouted for models down by the docks and in the bowls populaires, those public dance halls.
Places full of characters, I imagine.
Definitely. Which brings us to this amazing letter where he just pours out his impressions of Antwerp. You really get a sense of the sensory overload.
Compared to Nuenen, it must have been intense.
Totally. He talks about the docks as this impenetrable confusion, so different from the, tranquility of a country village. It clearly hit him hard.
He used that term Japaneserie again, right, for the talks.
He does. One huge Japaneserie, fantastic, peculiar, unheard of, echoing the Goncourt. You really have to try and picture it through his eyes, this completely new, strange, bustling world.
What kind of details did he pick out?
Oh, these incredibly vivid little scenes like a white horse standing in the mud next to a warehouse. Just perfectly simple, he says, but with black and white effect.
Striking.
And the contrast, looking out from some posh pub window onto the filthiest mud and seeing dock workers as ugly as sin, it's so immediate.
And the people he glimpsed.
Yeah, quick sketches, Flemish sailors with excessively ruddy faces, a fleeting sight of a Chinese girl. It really populates the scene.
He captures the energy, even the chaos. Didn't he mention a fight?
Yes, a sailor getting thrown out of a brothel, just raw, unfiltered observation.
But then there's a contrast, isn't there?
Yeah.
A quieter side.
Right. He steps away from the commotion, looks out towards the harbor's edge, and sees this infinite expanse of flat, half-flooded pasture, a sudden vast quietness.
So the harbor had this dual nature for him.
It seems so. Sometimes overwhelming, tangled, and fantastic, almost dizzying. But then from another angle, he'd find these beautiful, most peaceful lines, maybe like the painter Moles captured. He could find beauty in both the chaos and the calm.
And he was noticing all sorts of faces.
All sorts. Healthy girls, but also faces marked by smallpox, faces with a slyly vicious look, a real spectrum of humanity.
And all this time, he's setting up his studio.
Yes, he mentions getting his studio sorted and pinning up those Japanese prints he had. He even lists the themes women, gardens, horses, flowers, gnarled branches. It shows what imagery was catching his eye.
He also noticed something about the light, didn't he, affecting his paintings.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He felt his studies looked darker indoors in the city compared to how they looked when painted outside in the countryside light. He wonders, is the city light just less bright?
Interesting observation.
Yeah.
Shows how attuned he was.
And he's still keeping up with contemporary art, too. Mentions seeing a Lermit painting, October, and a Raffaelli drawing. So he's looking back at the masters, but also keeping an eye on the present.
He's really soaking it all in. Okay, moving into December 1885, another letter gives us more on his actual painting progress. Sounds like he finally got a proper model.
Yes, some money came through from Theo, finally. So he hired a singer from a Café Chantant, one of those music hall type places.
And he painted her head.
A life-size study. He goes into detail about the colors, using carmine and Prussian blue for her black hair, trying to capture what he called an esse homo-like expression.
Ecce homo. Like, behold the man. That sounds quite intense.
It does. He wanted this mix of maybe allure and sorrow. He was apparently inspired by something she said.
Oh, what was that?
She apparently told him, "For me, champagne doesn't cheer me up. It makes me very sad."
Wow. That's quite a line. You can see why that would stick with him. He wasn't just painting a surface.
Never just the surface. He was always after that inner state. He actually did a second study of her in profile, plus a commission and his own study, really digging into that one subject.
And this leads him to think more about portraiture in general.
Yes, he reflects on it as this timeless thing artists do, mentioning the Italians, Millet, Breton, and he asks that classic question. Do you start with the soul or from the close?
The inner versus the outer. Where did he lean?
Towards the soul, definitely. But he knew the externals mattered too, and interestingly, the singer herself apparently liked the work.
She did.
Yeah, she wanted one of the portraits and even offered to pose again in a dancer's costume if she found new lodgings. Shows there was some rapport there.
That's really nice to hear. But he also notes the practicalities, right? Working with busy people.
Oh, yeah. He knew he had to be fast, paint, even if they couldn't hold perfectly still. Time was always short.
And then there's his frustration with the art world, specifically a dealer named Portier.
Yes, his hopes of getting help through Theo's contacts seemed to be fading. He describes dealers generally as being like, une nation retirée du monde, a nation withdrawn from the world, just apathy.
That sounds pretty bleak. Isolated.
It does. But even then, he stresses the need for self-confidence and enthusiasm to keep going. He wasn't giving up, just recognizing the obstacles.
He also mentions Portier had supported the Impressionists earlier.
Yeah, a little side note showing he knew the recent history, how Portier was maybe overshadowed by Durand rule later on. It paints a picture of the changing art market.
Then, switching gears, he talks about seeing a photograph of a Rembrandt.
A really powerful reaction. He describes the lighting, that mysterious smile, and he says the people he's seeing on the streets in Antwerp, they remind him of figures in Rembrandt and Hals.
So constantly making those connections between past art and present life.
Always. And he's still going to those dance halls,
Mhm.
the balls populaires, just observing faces, women, sailors, soldiers, soaking it all in.
And reiterating how crucial it is to work from a live model.
Absolutely. That's where the real progress comes from, he believed.
The letter also touches on his health, his physical state.
Briefly, yeah. He mentions having trouble eating properly at first after getting the money, probably because he'd been eating so little before. Just a stark reminder of the hardship.
But he felt reasonably okay overall.
He says he felt reasonably strong après tout after all. And despite the struggles, you get this burst of excitement about new materials.
Brushes and colors.
Yes, new brushes, and especially carmine and cobalt blue. He describes cobalt as divine for creating atmosphere, and carmine as having the richness of the red of wine. You can feel his painter's joy in the materials themselves.
That's lovely. And then there's that funny story about being mistaken for an iron worker.
Huh, yes, by a doctor in Amsterdam. And Van Gogh was actually pleased about it.
Why do you think that pleased him?
Well, maybe it suggested he didn't look overwrought or stereotypically artistic. Maybe he liked seeming like a sturdy working man. It fits with his emphasis on hard graft.
Interesting take. He's also thinking about the future, asking Theo about business ideas.
Yeah, wondering about possibilities, but mostly expressing this deep need for more air and space and more models so he can produce work of higher quality. He's aiming for something lofty, genuine, something distinguished.
The ambition is always there, and a real focus on painting women he saw.
A very strong interest, yes. The female files of Antwerp clearly fascinated him. He mentions rereading de Goncourt again, finding inspiration in their dedication to observing their time and their eventual confidence, despite their pessimism.
Finding kindred spirits in literature. He talks again about the hardship, the near fasting.
He does, and how the moment he got money, his first instinct was find models, paint. It was just this fundamental drive.
And the city models were giving him new ideas.
Yes, their character was different from the country folk. He says it was giving him new thoughts about painting flesh tones. He's constantly learning, adapting.
And he explicitly mentions wanting to capture the horror's expression, again linking it to Rembrandt's power.
Yes, that commitment to authenticity, to showing life without sugarcoating. He links it to Zola and de Goncourt, too, the literary realists he admired.
And he dismisses more idealized painters, like Stevens.
Right. He wasn't interested in prettified versions of women. His own vision was becoming much clearer, more stubborn, perhaps.
But finding nude models was still a problem.
Still a challenge in Antwerp, yeah.
Then he makes this really interesting comment about the fin d'un siècle, the end of the century.
Yeah, he saw the women of his time as having this sort of revolutionary charm. He felt artists had to engage with them to be truly contemporary.
That feels quite modern, connecting art to social change. This all seems to be pointing toward Paris, doesn't it?
It does. He enrolls briefly at the Antwerp Academy, but his sights are really set on Paris the Louvre, modern art, more stimulation. Theo suggests Corman's studio as a place to study.
But money and health are still issues.
Always lurking, dentist bills are mentioned again, those constant grinding worries.
Yet he still has these big philosophical thoughts about the era.
Yeah, seeing it as a time leading up to a tremendous revolution, believing future generations would have it better. A kind of historical optimism, almost.
But the academy didn't last long.
No, predictable clashes. His way wasn't their way. He was seen as disruptive, apparently, and decided to leave.
So Paris became definite then. How did the move actually happen?
Well, he and Theo discussed him coming, sharing an apartment to save money. Theo seemed a bit hesitant about how quickly Vincent wanted to do it.
But Vincent wasn't one for waiting around.
Not at all. He just turned up in Paris around March 1886, sent Theo a telegram basically saying, "I'm here. Meet me at the Louvre."
Classic Vincent.
Just arriving.
Exactly. A sudden end to his Antwerp chapter and the start of something completely new and, well, explosive in Paris.
So, wrapping up this Antwerp period, what are the key takeaways? He leaves Nuenen because it's artistically stifling.
Right? He needs models. He needs exposure to the masters like Rubens, which Antwerp offers.
And he gets there, and it's this intense sensory experience. The docks, the city life.
Totally. A huge contrast to the country. And his focus really sharpens onto portraiture, trying to capture that inner life, that soul.
We see the early signs of the Japanese influence starting to percolate.
Subtly at first, but it's there. And all this happens despite him being constantly broke and facing practical challenges. His ambition just seems to grow stronger, though.
Yeah.
The desire to paint authentically.
Absolutely. Antwerp, though relatively short, was clearly crucial. It exposed him to new things, solidified his core artistic drive, and really paved the way for Paris.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about the power of just throwing yourself into a totally new environment.
It really does. That kind of sensory jolt, meeting different kinds of people, seeing new art. How much can that really change your path, creatively or otherwise?
It's a great question. What new stimulating place or experience might be out there for any of us, waiting to spark something different?
Something to definitely ponder.